possibility of democracy as a form of governance. I say this considering the growing trends in the dissatisfaction for democracy across African countries and other parts of the world. As we're all aware, all around the world, democracies are in crisis. The recent public poll by the University of Chicago found that the majority of Americans are unhappy with their democracy, stating that 74% of Americans felt that things are not going well in their country. There's, of course, another sort of noted democratic decline in Europe, which manifested in Spain's downgrade as being a full democracy, a flawed democracy in 2021. According to the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, almost half of all democracies in Europe have suffered erosion in the past 5 years, with 46% of high-performing democracies have also noted a particular backslide. Now, bringing us closer to home in the African continent, Afrobarometer surveys administered in 28 African countries noted a measly 38% of Africans are satisfied with the way democracy works in Africa. The so-called longest standing democracies in Africa, namely Botswana, South Africa, Ghana, and Namibia, are showing declines in satisfaction for democracy. South Africans' support for democracy has also dropped, according to Afrobarometer, by 32% to 40% in terms of their satisfaction. Botswana reported 30% of satisfaction in democracy, while only 51% of Ghanaians are satisfied with democracy. Surely there's something wrong. If not all, it is not all glory and gloom in this short segment of Democratic News tonight. The Democratic Republic of Congo, which is set to host its presidential elections later this year, it is said to have a very vibrant democracy, right? News reports have already accused the incumbent party for cracking down the opposition. Electoral reforms are declared unfair. The country's electoral commission is put into question. As for South Africa, the country has also had its fair share of court cases linked to electoral reform. In Zimbabwe, the opposition rejected the results, stating that there are a number of reasons that have been echoed in various media platforms. So, the primary objective of this particular lecture is to engage all of us in a provoking discussion on the current state of democracy in the SADC region, while analyzing specific context of Zimbabwe's national elections. We are honored to have Dr. Ibbo Mandaza, who will draw from his extensive research and experience as a way of shedding light on the key issues, challenges, and prospects for democracy in this important part of the continent. Before we have Dr. Mandaza come to the fore, I'd like to welcome Dr. David Masondo, who is the principal of the Tambo School of Leadership, to say a few words, and then we'll then proceed with Dr. Mandaza. Thank
you. No, thanks, Kennedy, and good evening to everyone. Mine is very brief. It's simply to explain the purpose of public lectures generally organized by our Tambo School of Leadership. These lectures are part of lecture series that we organize as our Tambo School of Leadership to engage the public on a whole range of things that we think are critical for public engagement. So today we are going to have this lecture on the state of democracy in Southern region, and as the Kennedy said, reflect on the recent elections on Zimbabwe. But you cannot understand these public lectures outside what we do as the school. So let me just spend about 2 minutes to explain what Tambo School of Leadership is, and what we do, and why we do what we do and how. So we are a school whose aim is aimed at helping all of us to understand how the world works and how to change it. So it's not just to understand how the world works, but also to work ways of changing the world. And we do so through public education, political education. And our curriculum is divided into 3 areas. One is policy education, in which we pick up either an economic policy and teach or facilitate political education around particular policies, social policy, health policy, economic policy, language policy, and so on and so on. But we also take seriously the teachings of facilitating political education around organizational skills, how to write minutes, things that we take for granted, how to chair a meeting, how to solve conflict. And the third area of our curriculum is what we call strategic courses. We've got 13, or we've been assigned to develop 13 courses by our board. These strategic courses range from introduction to economics, the position of Africa in the global economy, gender, the state. It's 13 of them, and so far we have put together 9 courses in which we have both the study guide and the facilitators guide. And many of our facilitators are drawn from universities, are drawn from the veterans of our movement who've been engaged in political education in different ways. So there's a few courses that we still need to develop. And one of them is the dilemmas of former liberation movements in power. So that's a course that we're working on. And we're looking forward, Prof, to work with you on this course. And I see Mr. Khayelihke as well is here. We definitely going to draw on your experience in putting together this course, because the 2 of you specifically, you've written a lot on this subject, on the dilemmas of the liberation movements in power, because sometimes in South Africa, we've got this exceptionalism in everything that we do or we see. We don't learn from other people who have gone through some of the challenges, problems that we basically have. Some of them, they've resolved those problems progressively, some of them not. And I think, because the way we develop these courses, we rely on the subject experts who guide on the content, and we've got technical people who put together these courses around learning objectives, learning activities, but the content we rely largely on subject experts. So today won't be the last time. We've been inviting you, Prof, to, it's not the first time that we ask you to come and address the platform of our Tambo, and it won't be the end. And we are looking forward to engaging you more beyond public lectures, but also helping us in designing the courses. Let me end it here and also acknowledge the board members of our Tambo School of Leadership who are present here, and the leadership of SADC and the Alliance as a whole, including the youth movement. If you see young people, Prof, coming in their numbers, the next 30 minutes or 45 minutes, don't think that they're coming to distract you. They've got their public meetings, it's vet students by and large. They've got their public meetings, but they said their meeting is taking a little bit longer, but they'll be joining us. So in an event, they come here in their numbers. I know you're a brave man, but don't get distracted and think that they're coming to distract you. Thank you, Khayelihke.
All right, so I have the most wonderful job of introducing a man that many of us have looked up to, that we admire, whose work has inspired some of our scholarship. That is Professor Ibbo Mandaza, who's a Zimbabwean academic, author, and publisher. He holds a PhD in political economy from the University of York in England. He taught at the universities of Botswana, Zambia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe on a part-time basis. He has researched and written extensively on issues of governance, international relations, public policy, and was one of the first senior African civil servants in post-independent Zimbabwe. Having been a member of the National Liberation Movement in Zimbabwe and the Department of Research, Education and Manpower at the ZANU-PF headquarters, Maputo and Mozambique, he served as the Director of the National Manpower Survey and Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Manpower, Planning and Development. As Deputy Chairman of the Public Service Commission and member of the Defense Forces Commission, and finally as the Chairman of the Parastatals Commission before his early retirement from the civil service in July 1990. And that was at the age of 42.
That's fired, man.
I wish the young people was here to be inspired around, what being youth actually encapsulates. Imagine achieving all of that, and by the age of 42, you're retired. So Professor Ibbo Mandaza was chairman of the board of your retired. So Professor Ibbo Mandaza was chairman of the board of directors of the second largest tourism and hotel group, which was named the Rainbow Tourism Group in Zimbabwe from 1992 to 2009. Professor Mandaza is currently executive chairman of the Southern African Political Economy Series, Series Trust, a regional think tank and convener of the Public Policy Dialogue Forum. He's also an adjunct professor here at the Red School of Governance, and he started his position in 2021. And he's also serving as the member of board of directors of the HSRC, the Human Sciences Research Council of South Africa, and he began that role in 2021, and he will be retiring from the position in 2025. So, Dr. Mandaza, we welcome you. We hope to hear and learn so much from you and be inspired, and hopefully all the participants are going to engage robustly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. I was beginning to wonder whether it was me that you were speaking about. So, also, thank you to those who belong to the endangered species in Southern Africa and Africa. And I see some of them here, Mole Simbeki, Mole Nkosi, and of course David Masondo himself. I will mention the endangered species because we have very few of us left. And even if there are many of us still standing, very few of them are with us. Sadly, we were talking about this earlier on, and therefore I'm always glad to be here at the OR school, if also because OR Tambo, for you much younger than ourselves, OR Tambo was one of the greatest Africans that this continent has ever produced. And some of us were honored and privileged to have known him, that giant. And it was in that context that my lecture tonight is bound to touch upon. I've been asked to look at the state of democracy in the SADC region. And I decided that instead of looking broadly at the region, in which the issue of democracy is self-evident, if you can talk of democracy, but we should focus on Zimbabwe. And I think that was the purpose of the title that David and his team gave me. very timely because the elections were held just a few weeks ago, and just yesterday, the SADC Troika met at last. I'll just send you a copy of the communique. So, the first part of my lecture is the context, which is the legacy of O.R. Tambo. 3 weeks ago today, this lecture was unceremoniously cancelled by the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Fikile Mbalula. In an email letter on 6 September, a day before the scheduled lecture, Mbalula directed the head of the school, David Masondo, that the lecture should not proceed on Thursday, 7 September 2023. End of quote. The correspondence was copied to Comrade Motlanthe, the chairperson of the board of the O.R. Tambo School of Leadership. Significantly, Mbalula was writing out of Harare, where he had accompanied President Cyril Ramaphosa for Mnangagwa's inauguration on 4th September. And so while Ramaphosa returned to South Africa soon after the inauguration ceremony, Mbalula and his entourage extended their stay for discussions with their ZANU-PF counterparts. Speculation is rife as to the nature of the meetings between the two former liberation movements, with reference to, quote, check book diplomacy, end of quote, about which we'll soon know more. You've heard of it before? Checkbook diplomacy. Yeah, Molly? But Mbalula's email letter suggested that the discussions included the subject of the messy election in Zimbabwe on 23rd August 2023. And so, I quote the sentence that was suggestive of the ANC being engaged with the crisis in Zimbabwe. I quote from Mbalula's letter: "At this moment, the leadership of the ANC is engaged in a number of delicate engagements regarding the situation in Zimbabwe. In this context, a public lecture at this time on what is clearly an ANC platform would complicate these initiatives. We invite you, David, to engage with us further on the detail of these matters and the possibility of the lecture being held in future in a different format and on a different platform," end of quote. I'm not sure, though I remain as suspicious at the reference to a different format on a different platform. Whatever the import of these words, it is clear that David Masondo and his comrades stuck to their guns, postponing the lecture as they have done, with the same title, the same format, the same platform. I am therefore pleased to be here as part of the assertion of academic freedom and a large response to those in our midst who dare try to muzzle the few corridors of intellectual and ideological discourse such as this school. For these corridors are few in post-liberation Southern Africa. In this regard, let me quote from one of the many comrades at home and across the diaspora who were outraged at Mbalula's email letter, which, thanks to social media, had gone viral within hours of the dispatch from Harare. Apologies, David. if I'm inadvertently betraying confidences, but a mutual comrade confided in me, and I'm likewise confiding in my audience appropriately. I quote, "Good evening, Comrade David. I hope this message doesn't offend you. At any rate, I would strongly encourage you to stand fast against any interference with the OR Tambo school's total autonomy and power to decide who to invite to speak on any subject your institution deems appropriate. Any abdication of this principle would be a betrayal of the principles OR lived for and upheld. It is your board's responsibility to uphold this cardinal principle." End of quote. The author of this has agreed that I can disclose his name, Mavuso Msimang. Comrade Mavuso Msimang. I want to add here how critical, indeed most legitimate, that more and more of those of us who are from the ranks of the former liberation movements stand up and be counted to inspire the younger generation, keep the flame of liberation alive, and remain a thorn in the flesh of those amongst us who have since gone rogue and constitute an embarrassment to the history and objectives of the liberation struggle. Yes, who will dare shut us up, comrades? Who amongst them has the moral authority to try to do so? Need I say any more? And now to the topic of my lecture. After that very useful digression and an open challenge to those in our midst who have since gone rogue. I will spend less on the elections per se in Zimbabwe and more about SADC, whose election observer mission, SIOM, has at last plucked the courage to state the reality that has been the nature and content of the crisis in Zimbabwe over the last 2 decades. Most significant in this regard is the extent to which all this has exposed the cowardice of many of the current leadership in SADC, while providing us the opportunity to remind all of us of the origins and mandate of the regional body itself. In doing so, to prompt SADC to take on its responsibility in the face of the crisis in Zimbabwe, convene the extraordinary summit, as it has done several times before over the last 4 decades of its existence. For we have to remember that SADC was born out of the liberation struggle in Southern Africa, the successor of the frontline states that were the backbone and rear guard of the struggles in Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa. And today, the custodian of peace, security, and stability in the sub-region. So, to the August 23rd election in Zimbabwe, I call this the unending legacy of disputed elections. Understandably, the SADC Election Observer Mission report on the 23rd of August, harmonized elections in Zimbabwe, has taken center stage and refuses to go away. But it was not the only observer mission report that returned a negative verdict on the poll. There are the European Union Observer Mission, EOM, the Carter Center, the Commonwealth Observer Group, and the African Union reports. although there has been little or no reference to them, the ANC, SWAPO, FRELIMO, CCM of Tanzania, MPLA, the Malawi Congress Party, and the Botswana government also dispatched observer missions to Zimbabwe. There is no guessing why these observer mission reports have not been made public. But significantly, not one of them has contradicted the import. None of them has contradicted the import of the SIOM report, which has clearly left the authorities in Harare embarrassed and wounded, while most of the SADC member states, and indeed the AU generally, appear to have acknowledged its findings by neither congratulating Mnangagwa nor attending his inauguration. President Ramaphosa, in particular, has made some clumsy statements on the subject. At the risk, to quote an observer on social media, of, quote, breaking the rules of procedure and undermining the authority of SADC by taking a position on the Zimbabwean issue before the region decides at the summit, end of quote. In this regard, sections of the media have caricatured Ramaphosa's position on Zimbabwe. For example, Business Day of 21st September had this very suggestive cartoon on, quote, premature congratulations. I almost got it wrong. With Ramaphosa stating on the one hand that, quote, the ZEC made a declaration and on that basis we issued our congratulations to Mnangagwa, end of quote. And on the other side of it, this, quote, this just in, the EU to withdraw 5 million financial aid to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission due to election irregularities and lack of transparency, end of quote. I'm sorry I'm not able to show you the cartoon, but it's here, Business Day. Nonetheless, Ramaphosa's stance on the recent elections in Zimbabwe is welcome relief to the authorities in Harare. Not least his comments that no election is perfect, nor without challenges. Even in the USA, he said. But surely, how does one ignore the stark reality that Zimbabwe has been the sick man in the region? In a region, particularly South Africa itself, in which free, fair, and credible elections are the order of the day, where ruling and opposition parties can interact either in business, in parliament, or in jest as fellow citizens of the same country. By contrast, the ZANU-PF state in Zimbabwe has since independence treated opposition parties as enemies to be vanquished, whether it was Joshua Nkomo and ZAPU, Edgar Tekere and Zoom, Morgan Tsvangirai and MDC, and now Nelson Chamisa and Triple C. It has jailed without trial political prisoners like Job Sikala and Jacob Ngarivume, manipulates the delimitation report and likewise the voters' roll, and has virtually captured it to itself the judiciary and the law enforcement and security apparatus. As Blade Nzimande observed in his remarks on the ZANU-PF that had by 2000 since lost the very forces that were part of the struggle. I quote from Blade, although without his voice. Now you know, comrades, when we went to Zimbabwe as part of the South African Communist Party fact-finding mission, when we engaged with our ZANU-PF comrades everybody was the enemy. The SADC was the enemy, professionals, academics, everybody. But we asked, how come, comrades, all these forces you are saying are enemies, were they not part of the victorious forces led by ZANU-PF on the victory of your struggle in 1980? What has changed? ZANU-PF has lost the middle classes, has lost the professionals and intellectuals, and has lost many urban-based organizations. It has become a rural party because of the mistakes they were making. Now, the comrades are denying yet that there is a problem. There is danger once liberation movements begin to lose power or sense they are about to are losing power. They start doing a lot of funny things. The first thing they start doing is coming up with, quote, radical concepts. Mugabe lost a referendum in 2000 and then started a radical land reform. They took land anyhow. And if they do not succeed, they unleash the security forces on the population, end of quote. So, I was also asked to, in this regard, make comments designed to warn our South African hosts. Please preserve and defend the national institutions that you have. Preserve the tradition of free, fair, and credible elections that you have. And the way to start, in my view, is through your own government and the ANC to stand up and criticize the government in Zimbabwe and the ANC and ZANU-PF for the things they've been doing over the last 2 decades, and not try and defend them, as I've just indicated. Indeed, both the electoral process of the last year and the poll itself on 23rd August were part of a major security operation, the likes of which has not been seen before in Zimbabwe. Not to mention again the point that every election since 2000 has been rigged and or ended in dispute. As Nigerian activist Aisha Yesufu stated recently, I quote, "Until rigged elections are treated in the same as coups, democracy will continue to be in danger," end of quote. Clearly, the 23rd August 23 election is in serious dispute and joins the series of coups, not excluding the military one of November 2017. This is the very antithesis of democracy itself and renders the electoral process farcical, a mere mechanism through which the securocrat state seeks to renew its illegitimate mandate, especially and significantly with respect to the presidential poll. As we have pointed out before, by all accounts, Robert Mugabe lost to Morgan Tsvangirai in the presidential polls of 2002, 2008, and 2013. Closer scrutiny of the 2018 elections would appear to confirm the view of a number of analysts that Emmerson Mnangagwa likewise lost to Nelson Chamisa. The security operation, including the deployment of the shadowy FAS and the calculated delay in the supply of ballot papers in Harare and Bulawayo on polling day, with many polling stations securing these well into the night of 23rd August. And even on the following day, 24th of August. Have you ever seen that? The rural areas all had their ballot papers in time. Harare and Bulawayo didn't get their ballot papers until late into the night. And it's no guessing how many people would have been disenfranchised. And you can understand why, in terms of the rigging objectives. Harare alone accounts for 1/3 of the total voting population. So a disruption of the capital city would have been enough to achieve the purpose for which that was being done. I mean, we are now learning that the rigging was done mostly in the CCC strongholds, in the opposition strongholds. Precisely in the areas where the CCC won is where the rigging was done most. Smart guys. On that basis, no one should be left in any doubt as to the extensive rigging that underpinned Mnangagwa's wafer-thin victory of 52% to Shamisa's 44%. Time will soon confirm, but we can confidently conclude that the election as a whole was neither free, fair, nor credible. A most depressing, if not cynical, feature about elections in Zimbabwe is the extent to which elections are so brazenly stolen and the voters rendered useless statistics. Deplorable, depressing. More so when we hear would-be statesmen glibly dismissing a pattern that has become legion in Zimbabwe as mere challenges, to quote Ramaphosa. Challenges that can be addressed in the future. Not to mention the shamelessness with which one can stand before the UN and claim that such an election was free, fair, and credible. Why would you have to say that if it was free, fair, and credible? So, what is to be done? The urgency of the SADC intervention in the crisis in Zimbabwe. There was initially the obvious expectation that the SADC troika of politics, defense, and security would be seized immediately with the situation in Zimbabwe, especially given the verdict of the observer mission on 25th August 2023, with the final version submitted on 4th September, just before Mnangagwa was inaugurated. Since then, there's been a discernible vacillation and even debate as to the mandate of SADC and its organ. All this quite apart from the emotional outpourings out of government spokespersons and other critics of Mumba, the head of SIOM in Harare. Crude attacks on the person of Mumba and even against President Hichilema. Most unprecedented and certainly bordering on serious diplomatic breach on the part of the government of Zimbabwe towards its northern neighbor. I'll make comments later on to the meeting of the Troika yesterday and the comments they made in this regard. Notwithstanding a statement from Ramaphosa on the very day he was defending the message he had sent to Mnangagwa congratulating him, that SADC would have to meet and discuss the report. The retort out of Harare in particular, and the region generally, has been to throw doubt on the mandate of SADC in these matters, let alone its capacity to do anything, including the following statement, supposedly from SADC Secretariat itself, but dubious given our understanding of the matter of SADC. And I quote, I think someone might have seen us on social media, a little note saying, SADC electoral observer missions only observe elections. SADC does not conduct elections in its member states, but observes them. We then make recommendations. Understand the role of SADC. When it comes to observing elections, our mandate is only to observe and issue a report, end of quote. Now, of course, this vacillation, this kind of statements reflect badly on the lack of political will on the part of the current leadership of SADC. But it's certainly the very antithesis of the mandate of the regional bodies Windhoek Treaty of 1992, its organ on politics, defense and security of 1996, and the SADC Electoral Advisory Council, SIAC, which was formed by the organ in 2005. To quote SIAC, the Southern African Development Community, SADC Electoral Advisory Council, SIAC, was formed to transform election observation, the conduct of democratic elections, and the prevention of electoral-related conflicts in the SADC region. Established in August 2005, in terms of Article 9, Paragraph 2 of the SADC Treaty, the SADC Summit held in Gaborone, Botswana, SIAC's broad mandate is to advise SADC on matters pertaining to elections, democracy, and good governance. The overall objective of SIAC is to contribute to the prevention of electoral-related conflict in the SADC region through the design and implementation of a conflict prevention strategy focused on each stage of the electoral cycle that outlines the specific contribution of SIAC. The proposal to establish SIAC resulted from a stakeholder workshop convened by the SADC Secretariat in Lesotho in 2004, where stakeholders recommended that SADC form a mechanism that would not only guarantee the implementation of the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections, but also strengthen the capacities of electoral management bodies and facilitate the work of the SADC electoral observer missions. Following a comprehensive assessment of the workshop recommendations, the Ministerial Committee of the Organ on Politics, Defense and Security recommended to the Heads of State Summit the formation of SIAC. After SIAC's formation in 2005, the Ministerial Committee adopted SIAC structures, rules and procedures in March 2009, and SIAC was officially established in August 2010 at Maputo, Mozambique, and inaugurated on 13th April 2011 in Gaborone, Botswana. According to the SIAC structures, rules and procedures, the main objective of SIAC shall be to advise SADC through the Ministerial Committee on issues pertaining to elections and the enhancement of democracy and good governance. In addition to its main objective, the specific objectives of SIAC are: 1, to urge and encourage SADC member states to adhere to the principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. 2, to encourage SADC member states to adhere to international best practices whenever they are holding elections. 3, to advise SADC member states on strategies and issues to enhance and consolidate capacity of member states with respect to elections. And lastly, to encourage SADC member states to uphold and respect the independence and autonomy of electoral management bodies. End of quote. I've quoted SIAC at length just to remind ourselves that there are rules in SADC with respect to elections. And I'm glad, as I'll indicate later, that SADC is on course to take action on the process in Zimbabwe. Of course, SIAC is derived from the provisions of the SADC Treaty of 1992, and its overall objective of creating an integrated community of nations as part of the building blocks towards an integrated African Union. Implicit in all this is that member states is necessarily a forego part of their sovereignty in the interest of the larger whole. But those of us who were charged in 1996 with the responsibility to draft the protocols of the organ on politics, defense, and security were informed by these ideals of regional and continental unity and the quest for a common foreign policy through which to prevent conflict, promote peace and stability, and, if necessary, attend to and deal with an errant member state. We were aware of what I referred to in 1998 on the occasion of the SADC intervention in Lesotho as a hierarchy of powers implicit in all regional and global organizations. This is the extent to which some member states therein wield more power than others, tend to be politically and economically hegemonic in a given region, or lend themselves into the so-called permanent members of the UN Security Council, namely USA, China, Russia, Britain, and France. In short, there's always been the implicit acknowledgement that South Africa is the hegemon in SADC. Of course, Zimbabwe, particularly under Mugabe, who tried to challenge Mandela as the obvious giant that he was, has always tried to play the card of precedence or seniority, as the case may be. It was this untidy relationship between Mugabe and Mandela, especially over the crisis in DRC in 1998, that led to the Defense Pact signed on 31st July 1998, sponsored by Zimbabwe and including the three other members, namely Angola, who were very irked and perturbed at Mandela's hosting of Savimbi in Pretoria, Namibia, and the DRC itself. Suffice to state that the Defense Pact, although designed within the ambit of the SADC organ on politics, defense, and security in 1996, nevertheless constituted a serious threat to SADC. I don't know how many of you remember this incident. At least to the extent to which it was meant to warn Mandela, which was Mandela South Africa, which was loudly opposed to the intervention in DRC, and whose overtures to Savimbi and Mobutu were regarded as offensive on the part of Angola and DRC respectively. That's many years ago, 1998. In retrospect, both these developments and the precedents in which SADC had an interventionist role would have helped to grow the organ on politics, defense, and security, and informed and underpinned SIAC itself. The more reason why SADC itself, the member states therein, and the current heads of state of the regional body should be reminded of their respective responsibilities in the face of the disputed elections in Zimbabwe. Indeed, we need to list the precedents in terms of SADC's intervention in the face of similar cases over the years, if only to highlight the capacity and the responsibility of the regional body in the face of such crisis. First of all, SADC was responsible in the center of the final phase of the struggles of Namibia and South Africa. And as both frontline and SADC states, they were invariable in both the isolation of apartheid South Africa and the enforcement of global sanctions against Pretoria, while providing support to the liberation movements, including the Black Watches movement, the UDF in South Africa. Then comes the Roma Accords of 1990 on peace in Mozambique, Mugabe was the center of that on behalf of SADC. And remember, Zimbabwe was already supporting the Mozambique government against Renamo. Then you have the Lesotho crisis from September 98 to May 99, when SADC intervened through South Africa, having to deploy a military force to quell a crisis following a disputed election in that country. Then, of course, the DRC war of 1998-99, with Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia actively involved in supporting Kabila and the other SADC countries like Tanzania, Zambia, and Mozambique, providing support in various ways at their disposal. Then, of course, we have SADC intervention in the DRC. And just this year, they met on the 8th of May 2023 and agreed to deploy SADC troops to the DRC to help quell violence in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. In fact, there's developed a possible combination of SADC states, SADC forces, and those of the East African community operating jointly in the DRC. And in fact, Malawi, South Africa, and Tanzania have been there in the DRC for a decade now, under the United Nations Peacekeeping Force, MONUSCO. Following a meeting of the SADC Troika on politics, defense, and security on 8th May 2023, and again on 11th July 2023, SADC approved the mandate, legal, and operational instruments for the deployment of SADC mission to DRC. So, then we have SADC intervention in Madagascar, as you're aware. But it is to Zimbabwe that I want to turn quickly in conclusion. Turning to Zimbabwe specifically, SADC has had two extraordinary summits in less than 2 decades. The first was 28th to 9 March 2007, held in Dar es Salaam, following the brutal attacks by the state on Morgan Tsvangirai and his lieutenants on 7th March. I don't know if you remember the incident. That necessitated a summit, which was called in Dar es Salaam. Because the region was so incensed at such barbaric behavior that the summit mandated President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa to continue to facilitate dialogue between the opposition MDC and Mugabe's government and report periodically to the Troika. Then the summit held on the 1st of July 2008 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where SADC and the African Union resolved that the disputed election should be resolved through a GNU. And I read part of the summit. One, to encourage Mugabe and Tsvangirai to honor their commitment to institute dialogue with a view to promoting peace, stability, democracy, and the reconciliation of the Zimbabwean people. To support the call for the creation of a government of national unity, to support the SADC facilitation, and to recommend that SADC mediation efforts should be continued in order to resolve the problems they are facing. In this regard, SADC should establish a mechanism on the ground in order to seize the momentum for a negotiated solution. To appeal to states and all parties concerned to refrain from any action that may negatively impact on the climate of dialogue. And in the spirit of SADC initiatives, the AU remains convinced that the people of Zimbabwe will be able to resolve their differences and work together once again as one nation, provided they receive undivided support from SADC the AU, and the world at large. I mention all this because we are simply back to where we were in 2008, a disputed election. So we, on the basis of that, some of us have launched a petition, and I just quote from it: "We believe that Zimbabwe has again reached the Lancaster House moment, the occasion on which to get back to the drawing board, reflect on a difficult 2 decades of conflict, and embark on the path towards a comprehensive political and economic settlement." Accordingly, on 7th September 2023, as a resolution of the combined meeting of the SABC Trust and the Platform for Concerned Citizens, launched the following petition to the SADC organ on politics, defense, and security. Once again, I quote, "Once again, a Zimbabwean election fails the test of credibility. However, the 2023 harmonized elections have failed the test so comprehensively that even the reputable regional and international observers are for once all in agreement that this election has failed. The main opposition and many civil society organizations have condemned the election, as have many ordinary citizens. The only response can be to declare the elections null and void. But then, what should they be done? By any measure, the government since 2017 has shown no ability to reform, either politically or economically, now to create the conditions that could lead to an election that is free, fair, and credible. The coup in 2017 did not usher in a new dispensation, but a continuation of the kind of governance that has led to the 2023 result. There needs to be a new way to resolve the crisis that this election has now deepened further, and not in the way that the crisis of 28 was managed. Therefore, the way forward must be bold and innovative, recalling the manner in which the Rhodesian crisis was dealt with. This must require the following. 1, the establishment of an eminent persons group tasked with negotiating the establishment of a transitional government composed of political parties and other major citizen groupings. 2, the negotiations must be broad-based, including political parties, civil society, churches, labor, women, and other citizen groupings. The transitional government should set up with a clear and specific set of reforms that must be achieved, which include 1, the resolution of the coup and the amendment to the Constitution allowing untrammeled military interference in civilian affairs, full adherence to constitutionalism, the rule of law, and human rights, the reform of critical state institutions, the stabilization of the economy with a pro-poor emphasis, the establishment of a sovereign fund to ensure the country benefits from its bountiful resources. Complete overhaul of all the election machinery and legislation to ensure that the elections that follows the period of the transitional government will lead to an election that meets regional and international standards. This is the only way forward to resolve the crisis, and we call on all Zimbabweans in the country and in the diaspora to support the petition. And we call on SADC through the organ on politics, defense, security, the AU, and the international community to support and scaffold this. By September 2023, the petition had mobilized 80,000 signatures, with plans to officially elevate the document into the national program on the back of a meeting to be held next week, 5th August, in which the totality of civil society, trade unions, churches, professional, and other lobby groups at home and in the diaspora will press towards a comprehensive political and economic settlement in Zimbabwe. In appealing to both SADC and the AU, the petition is recommending the appointment of the eminent persons group, possibly Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, Jakaya Kikwete of Tanzania, and Kgalema Motlanthe of South Africa, as the facilitation and mediation agencies through which Zimbabweans at home and abroad can find each other and hopefully have a transitional government or something similar, and charged with the political and economic reform agenda before the next elections in Zimbabwe. In this regard, we have also solicited the support of the Coalition for Dialogue on Africa, CODA, a joint venture of the African Union, the Africa Development Bank, and the Economic Commission of Africa, and chaired by President Obasanjo, to assist Zimbabwe in this dialogue towards a resolution of the crisis in Zimbabwe. And in conclusion, and through the occasion of this public lecture, this is to appeal to the ANC and its government to pursue what Mbalula referred to in his email to David Masondo on 6th of September as, quote, delicate engagements regarding the situation in Zimbabwe, end of quote. If the latter objective was indeed the reason for the apparent unceremonious cancellation of the lecture on 7th September to this day, then I plead with all of you that the ANC Secretary General be forgiven in the sincere expectation that South Africa itself in particular, SADC and the AU are indeed engaged with the crisis in Zimbabwe. I thank you. That's yours. And this book too. For the school and this. Okay. Do I remain here for questions now?
I think, would you like to remain?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know about everyone in the room, how you're feeling after that lecture, after all that has been said, and particularly the greatest appeal, not only to a moral compass, but also a reminder of literally the responsibility that we have, particularly as Africans, particularly those here in South Africa, the South African government, as well as the various regional bodies that we have, particularly SADC. I'm not going to say a lot. We'll open the room for engagement, questions, comments for the next 45 minutes. So please, we would like to have hands, those who are willing to break the ice and say something. Okay. 4, 5. Okay, so we're going to do rounds of 5, and then, after the responses, that please introduce yourself and then state your comments or questions.
My name is Twinama Fatan. I attended on my capacity as a resident around 160. I don't have a mandate. This vets university is within 160 in terms of demarcation we hear the information that has been given us by Prof. Dr. Ibbo Mandaza. But one, as he is sitting here, we hear the rules and we understand the importance of international relations, especially as South Africans. But there are so many things that are disturbing about Zimbabwe. Because when the elections were held there in Zimbabwe, the majority of Zimbabweans were here in the country. That's a very serious area of concern. Because if you can compare ourselves when the African National Congress was still banned, not all of us went outside into exile. We fought here with stones facing the enemy, which was here by then, the apartheid system. But when it comes to the situation of Zimbabwe, majority of the people there seem to have given up in terms of the consistent elections that are taking place there. And they don't, majority of them, they don't even bother to be in their country during elections. While we understand the conditions under which they are living. And for sure, they are our neighbors. But even on citizens of the country, we believe on that people are the liberators of themselves. Let me just pause there.
Thank you, Professor, for your very eloquent and insightful presentation. I'll begin with what the previous explanation. I think there's like a fusion, the issue of the diaspora, Zimbabweans in South Africa. I think it creates some form of fusion between the two nations, because that's something that really makes South Africa to be an interesting party in attempting to resolve the Zimbabwean situation that we're just discussing. Now, the other issue I'd like to mention is the issue of some of the limitations of the interventions and regulations of the nation. Because I remember the Shannon Sheikh situation, something rather graphic, because what happened was that Zambia was President Mandaza was supposed to lead this discourse in that summit. And I think it had been mentioned that President Mugabe was not to attend, he was not expected to attend. And then on the very last moment, it was announced that President Mugabe came to the summit. Now, when he arrived, it's claimed that President Mandaza collapsed and for some reason never recovered. Now, much more than that, when Mugabe addressed that summit, he really gave a time ration to many of the leaders who are attending, who are coming out to criticize what happens. We must try to point out that they have their own baggages, the states. And at the end of the day, I think one of the best speeches, according to those who attended them, was an innovation. So the stature of President Mugabe is intellectual and practice and so forth. I think it's one of the issues that one has to interrogate with the disability questions in Zimbabwe historically. But the Shannon Sheikh summit shows the limitations of the interventions that have been proposed. Now, another issue that also has to be considered is the issue of the fusion of the state, especially the security apparatus. That I think is something that is one that needs to look at, because as you mentioned yourself, the transition from Mugabe to current leadership was not led, well, people did protest, but the main agent, I think, was the Zimbabwean Mr. Chiwenga, Dr. Chiwenga, and his group, and the instructors.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the wonderful lecture. My name is Christopher. I'm one of economics at UPH here from Zim. I'm worried about the state of democracy in the SADC region. Why? South Africa is seen as a beacon of democracy in this region. But if I trace the behavior of South Africa when it comes to this subject, I have a few reasons to be worried, and this is specifically when it comes to Zimbabwe. I'll take it back a bit. During 2008 elections, there was a lot of stuff going on during those elections that led to a rerun. Then it was Mbeki who negotiated the national government of national unity, GNU, so to say. But it was clear that Robert Mugabe had lost momentum trying to run. And he himself, Robert Mugabe, later revealed that he got less than 40%, and Tsvangirai won by more than 60%. So they played a very significant role in silencing the voice of the people through the ballot box. That's number one. Then number two, when the coup happened in 2017, South Africa is the beacon of hope. I was expected to say something about the coup, but they didn't. And their silence spoke a lot when it comes to sanitizing the coup that happened in Zimbabwe. Then in 2018, the military killed people who were demonstrating. What South Africa did, they sent Motani, the commission. There was a lot expected from that commission, but it was later seen as a sanitization again of those killings by the Motani commission. Then recently, we are seeing the current regime in South Africa, Ramaphosa and Balula. I think he said a lot about, them taking sides when it comes to politics in Zimbabwe. Sanitizing the recent elections before even SADC took a stand. Balula stopping this lecture to proceed. Ramaphosa equating the Zim situation with the USA situation. So, South Africa being a beacon of democracy and what it is currently doing in the region, to me is a cause of concern. So, where are we going as a region? Are we supposed to continue looking up to South Africa as the beacon of democracy, or we're supposed to come up with another avenue? So that's number one. Then number two, based on the background that I just gave, what does South Africa stand to benefit from the continuation of, a mess in Zimbabwe? If you look at the borders right now and the immigration crisis, they affect South Africa. A lot of burden is put on South Africa's government expenditure. Most of these problems are coming from Zimbabwe. Immigration crisis. Illegal immigrations from Zim, they constitute more than 40% of immigrants who are in South Africa. But ANC keeps continuing supporting Zambia. So where do they benefit? Is it an individual benefit or is it a country benefit? So that's the question number two. And number three,
That's
the last one. Sorry. Looking at the way forward, Mr. H.H. Chilema is very instrumental when it comes to the way forward. You have brought up a petition, and is one of the people I expected to look into it. considering the recent attacks on Chilema himself by the Zambian government, and the history that was given by our father here of the previous, handling of someone who raised the voice. Do you think Hichilema is going to play a neutral role in making a way forward for the Zimbabwean case? Thank you.
So we have a gentleman at the back and then.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Tafara Ibbo Mandaza. I'm a Zimbabwean and I went home to vote. I'm interested. I'm interested also myself as a young person wanting to learn and understand politics. So my question is, so I have a legal background, I studied law in District of Venda, country South Africa. How can we counter disinformation and misinformation, particularly when it comes to the mandate of SADC, vis-a-vis that our constitution and electoral laws are in line with the SADC guidelines and what Prof. Mandaza stated that the mandate of the SADC Advisory Council. So then my other question, the second question is, what can be done to counter this disinformation and misinformation, and how can we use regional and international laws together with the local laws to address the disputed elections, basing it on human rights? We can just use human rights to say, okay, at international law, regional law, they may not be binding, but at local law, these laws are already there and binding and can be used to address that. Since in Zimbabwe, we can say we've exhausted the internal remedies like going to the courts, and it's, as this seems, it's still a miss. Thank you.
My name is Valentine Zimbabwean. I am a Zimbabwean. I contested in the previous election as a member of parliament in Zimbabwe. So I voted and I took a stance in fighting. My question to you, Doctor, is very simple. And I just want to give background to what the gentleman said. We are seen, the opposition is seen as being dominant, as not being active enough in terms of pursuing the agenda. I think the narrative that is there now is that, as by the way, I contested as a Citizens Coalition for Change member of parliament, just to give background. So there is this, should I say, that is being drawn out, that opposition is not doing enough and we are not coming out. Now, maybe just to give context, there was a protest that was done and the army was sent out and it killed people in 2018. Now, one of the things that we as the opposition, especially as leaders, we have been advocating, especially to our leader, is in light of what is happening, we need to pursue what is called civil disobedience. Now, here is the challenge. Suppose we make a call out because people are asking, give us a signal. Let's go out in the street and protest against this sham election. There are two things that's going to happen. The regime in Zimbabwe is going to send out its army, is going to send out and kill people. The SADC as a region has already not taken a stance when people were killed in 2018. How sure are we that we will have the voice of SADC should we pursue such avenues, such as civil disobedience? That's number one. Then the second question relates to, I think it was asked, but I'm going to ask it again. The issue of the role of the ANC in this whole situation that we have. It appears that, and I would want your view on this, it appears the SG of the ANC at one point is decrying about Zimbabweans in South Africa and how they have, in a way, suffocate the health system, everything. and then he goes on another podium. The same SG says the elections are free, we do not support imperialists. So any opposition to a liberation movement is regarded as imperialist. But at the same time, you have the same SG decrying that Zimbabweans are suffocating. So my question to you is, do you think that, I'm not going to take the whole leadership, but some leaders within the ANC are benefiting politically, because now that the country is going into elections in 2024, let's bash out the issue of illegal immigration. But at the same time, you are supporting the causes of illegal immigration, which stems from disputed election. Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't think there were many questions. I think there were many contributions. I can only add to them, I think. The first one, I think, has been answered by the last question. It's a dilemma. We can go into another lecture on that, but the dilemma or the paradox in terms of South Africa's policy on Zimbabwe. As you put it very bluntly, that on the one hand there's a complaint. In fact, Balula said the whole of Zimbabwe has moved into South Africa. He said that, didn't he? He says there's no, I'm the only one left in Zimbabwe. It is an exaggeration. There's a whole narrative to be told about the issue of migrants, Zimbabwean migrants in this country. Another subject altogether, David, I think. It's a mixture of sorts. On the one hand, it contributes, the Zimbabwean diaspora is a major cause of the depletion of civic action. No doubt about that. To be more graphic, right now 75% of Zimbabwean professionals and skilled persons are outside the country. 75%. These are the people who would be part of the leadership in civic society, in government. And it's no doubt, we have the worst government since the independence now in Zimbabwe. It's no secret. They'll be the first to admit it in terms of competence, in terms of, to the extent that they don't reflect the fact that Zimbabwe has had this massive human resource base professionals. And indeed, even the political parties, the opposition, cannot be said to have the best of leaders or reflect the kind of people we have as Zimbabwe in totality. So clearly, the diaspora is the cause of much of our misery in Zimbabwe. The option of going across the Limpopo instead of facing up to the regime. So paradoxically, we have a situation where this diaspora, the only very positive side of it is this. One is that the Zimbabwean diaspora is assisting South Africa in enormous terms. I hear this Minister of Home Affairs of yours speaking strange tongues about the Zimbabwe employment permits. For heaven's sake, those permits are not for nothing. They're an acknowledgement that those 250,000 Zimbabweans are doing a piece of work in this country. Let them go back and to see how many of your services will survive in this country. Health, education, engineering. Please recognize that before you make this very generalized and global and universal statement that migrants are all bad. It's not true. It's false. Huh? That's the first. The other positive thing, okay, so Zimbabweans are helping the neighborhood, Namibia, South Africa, Botswana, and even the former colonial power, Britain. Last year, 17,000 health workers went to the UK. 17,000 doctors, nurses. We lost a whole team of engineers from National Rails of Zimbabwe. A whole team of engineers are now working for British Rail and running it very efficiently. Because the British don't work, huh? They go to football and pubs. So, let's be very clear. We need to acknowledge and recognize that Zimbabwean diaspora has been a major contribution to the region and many parts of the world. That's the first. While it is also true that they've depleted a home front. And thirdly, the diaspora contributes $2 billion US a year, which is far more than the national budget in remittances back home. And this has been a major support base for the population, which is in dire straits where there's unemployment is 80 to 90%. So that's just to give some information on the Zimbabwean diaspora. The second question was from the High Commissioner Kintu Nyago. It was just a point you're raising, namely what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh. There are rumors that Zambians want an official inquiry into the death of Mwanawasa. But I think the happenings at Sharm el-Sheikh were so dramatic. Besides, we need to remind you that 2008, 28th of March election, Morgan Tsvangirai won. In fact, I remember telling Morgan Tsvangirai that Mugabe had lost by a landslide. And he said, "You mean I won by a landslide?" I said, "No, it's quite different. In Zimbabwe, the vote usually is against, okay? For example, I voted against somebody on the last election. And the pattern of voting in Africa, in particular, but all over, is always to vote against the incumbent, logically. And if you vote for the incumbent, then you must be the very odd one. And in 2008, for example, Mugabe was getting no vote at all in the polling station, in 184. The same thing happened 2018 to Mnangagwa. The same thing happened this time around. The figures will be out very soon from ZESA. But I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, "Look, I lost election and I concede defeat." And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, "You stay where you are." And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. I don't know. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? So, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it. And the report has never been published, the general's report, to this day. That tells you. Is it complicit behavior? I don't know. But to get back to 2008, the runoff took place. Mugabe was sworn in at midnight before boarding a plane with Mbeki to Sharm el-Sheikh. Ambassador, I forgot to mention that. Yes? I won't talk about it was contrived, but clearly there was a definite plan to keep Mugabe in office. And it's no secret that I had Thabo speaking the other day, saying the Zimbabwean people came together to form the GNU. It's only half true. Morgan Tsvangirai was literally regimented into the GNU. That's a fact. Even though he was partly to blame because he ran away from victory. If he had stuck and not run away to Botswana, he would have been president in June 2008. But he ran away. This fear of death among the opposition in Zimbabwe is sickening. You know, I remember seeing Morgan Tsvangirai the day after the election when he had clearly won, and we knew he had won. And we had called a meeting to confront the SADC observer mission led by Angola at that time. And Morgan could not be found. Morgan had run away to the South African embassy. So we had to phone the ambassador, a very close friend of ours, Makalima. And Makalima made Morgan available for the meeting. I took Morgan through Rainbow Towers, through the back entrance. And after the first flight of stairs, he stopped. He says, "Ibbo, aren't you scared?" Scared of what? Of being killed. I say, "Morgan, are you scared to be killed?" Huh? I took his hand and I ran up with him. I said, "Go sit." We got to the meeting and he fell asleep in the meeting. And the next morning, I was off to Botswana. I had to come here to fetch Biti. Biti also ran away to Cape Town. So the whole opposition ran away to run away from victory. There's a problem with that opposition movement you're talking about. Serious problem. Problem of leadership. And therefore, to reference the last election, I have evidence that on the day of the poll, when it was discovered that this was a deliberate ploy to withhold the ballot papers, Shamisa was confronted by his colleagues and said, "Look, let's pull out of the election now. It's no use." And he refused. I've also been told that some of the leaders said, "Look, let's go on the streets." And he refused. So, we have a problem. People are scared to die. So, if you're a leader scared to die, then there's something wrong with you, to put it very humbly. Yeah, you must be paid. If others were killed on the 1st of August, 2018. And when one of our discussions we had on the elections, the question was raised by someone that why is the SACC going on to the elections when they know that the conditions for free fair are not there? And someone stood up and said, you know what? We must make a resolution here in this meeting that if, as is predictable, the elections will not be free, fair, and credible, if Chamisa, after insisting on going for elections, insists on people going on the street, he should go on the street on his own. So you have that lack of confidence in the leadership. The party-state conflation, Ambassador, it really has to do with the whole history of ZANU, going back to the struggle days. The extent to which militarism was the most dominant factor in the liberation struggle. Militarism as opposed to politics, which you don't have in the ANC, by the way. Although I think some of you wish you had that. But basically, the military has been far too dominant. The military security apparatus has always been dominant. In Mozambique, in our time, the most powerful person was Tongogara. We hear all kinds of theories of Tongogara. This Tongogara was the most powerful person there was. And no doubt what would have happened if he had survived into independence. You'd have a typically military state of the kind that you have now, if not worse. That's my personal view anyway. That the conflation of party-state is developed over time, but certainly since 2000, when the military has been involved in elections, all elections since 2000. The ZEC, the so-called election commission, is actually a security apparatus in essence. And this election, the last election, I mean, as I said in my lecture, it was a security operation. I mean, you remember that FIRES was deployed in March. Funded $10 million US and deployed across the country in every community to regiment the population election day. So, again, it's legion that the military, the security are involved in every election. And the region knows it. And when an election report, such as our last one, states the obvious, then you see anger in Harare and consternation in Pretoria. You see a whole president saying, no, the report, shouldn't have gone that far, Christopher, you'll be pleased to know that the Troika met yesterday on Zimbabwe. I just saw the communique just now as I was coming to the lecture. But 3 points that I picked up I gleaned from the report. One was that the Troika meeting virtually yesterday under the chairmanship of Ichilema, together with Gengob of Namibia and Samia of Tanzania, received the report of Mumba. In other words, they accepted the report. Secondly, the communique complained at the behavior of the government of Zimbabwe officials who variously attacked Mumba in his person, who attacked Ichilema, and the SADC secretary has been asked to convey the concern of the Troika over such conduct. The third, which I gleaned, please forgive me because I have not read it in full, was that the report was now being referred back to Harare for their reactions. Now, which raises a big question. If the report said, as it did, that there was no election in Harare, does the Troika expect Harare to say, okay, we'll go for another election? Or that, as Harare has indicated, they will ignore that report? So, we wait and see. The fourth, which is more important for our discussion here, is that the Troika reaffirmed the rules and protocols of SADC with respect to elections and warned that unless SADC observes and adheres to these best practices, the future of democracy is in danger in the region. It's a very, very important statement. So, I'm not sure how far Hichilema will go, but I would say the following, that as long as South Africa is not in full support, we are going to see Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa taking comfort from the people who hurried to congratulate him, as they did. People rushed to the inauguration. South Africa is going to remain a key factor. Without South Africa, little or nothing can be done in Zimbabwe. That's the reality. We have been to the AU, informally, some of us, and its message is very clear. Unless SADC and South Africa want action, we can't do anything. I did mention my article in the Sunday Times, so it's not a secret. But we have been here since January. We've been meeting with DERCO, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that DERCO, the officials therein, that is, the minister and the officials, are really on the same page with all of us about the need for action on Zimbabwe. But it's clear to me that the executive, certainly Ramaphosa, and no doubt Fikile from his pronouncements, are opposed to any action on Zimbabwe. In fact, everything has been delayed because so far, several attempts to have me and my delegation meet President Ramaphosa have been a waste of time. And that's why my last paragraph I'm appealing. And that's why I'm glad that David persisted and allowed us to come here. So at least in your presence and the presence of the many others who are out there on Zoom, can take this message to South Africa as bluntly as I've said. That if you want the Zimbabwe question resolved, you can do it. It can be done tomorrow. Not by military intervention, by simply reading the Right Act to Harare, period. That the following has to be done, or else 1, 2, 3 will happen. Simple as that. Tafara, I hope that what I've said, the outline on SIAC in particular, I did that deliberately because at one point, although SIAC was a very important document, few in SADC even know about it, not even the Secretariat. So we did this lecture deliberately to try and remind all of us of the responsibilities that lie ahead of us. I think I'll stop there. I think I've said enough.
Yes. I'm trying to see if there are questions online. I'm trying to see if there are questions online.
Okay.
Okay. So we actually have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah? So that means really succinct. Like by succinct, like really summarize your question. So we're going to take hands, So the Dembeki will take you and so we have 4 questions, and I think those will be this will be our final round considering the time. So the Dembeki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mwele Zimbabwe from the South African Institute of International Affairs. I think Ibbo has given us an answer to why there is no solution to the crisis in Zimbabwe. Every country around Zimbabwe is cannibalizing the country. They are cannibalizing the human capital of Zimbabwe. The ones further afield are cannibalizing the diamonds of Zimbabwe. There are others now going to cannibalize the lithium in Zimbabwe. So there is literally no one who is interested in the welfare of the Zimbabwean people. All the big players in SADC, like South Africa. Zimbabwe is not paying to South Africa. I mean, our retail sector in South Africa makes mega profits from Zimbabwe. But it helps with the destruction of the Zimbabwean economy. Zimbabwe used to have a huge food processing sector in the economy. This food processing sector has been replaced by imports from South Africa. So at the end of the day, to me, this is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. It is being cannibalized by the whole world, starting with South Africa, and Botswana, and Zambia, and China, and everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. My name is Ibbo Mandaza. I am an honors student in international relations. So my focus largely within my honors is the African School of High Art. And there's one thing that we cannot distinguish, or rather try to separate, and that is our history as South Africa and Zimbabwe through colonization, which was by the British. So the biggest case in point is to find that we have these histories and we have leaders within our liberation movement who, for example, we find our SG, and we have, for example, Julius Malema, who was vehemently supporting the Mnangagwa regime. Now we have ourselves as students who are actually experiencing from our different experiences within campuses from our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe. Now we have a difficulty because we have some form of ideological confirmation to what the organization is saying and the loyalty that we have into the organization. But the difficulty that we have is the fact that we are sitting with our brothers and sisters, more especially at which universities, who are giving us a very, very different experience to what we are being told to conform to and what we are being told to actually abide by to, because we have this concept of balance of forces. If we are pro-West, we are against you. If we are pro-East and Africa, we are for you. So my question is to us who are within the academia and who are still young, to say, where do we then find the equilibrium between the experiences that we get from this institution and the party line that our organization that always tells us about? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ibbo Mandaza, for that very insightful lecture. I think the saying by Vladimir Lenin, better few but better twice in this setting, because we cannot really put a price on the substantive input that you have given today. So my question largely speaks to two things. It's one that you spoke a bit about when you were looking at the electoral management body in Zimbabwe, saying that it is a security operation. To say, to what extent does this dwindling democratic practice in the SADC affect democratic institutions such as electoral management bodies? And how do we then insulate ourselves from the conflation of the state and the party, as been raised before, which is a catalytic threat that threatens these democratic institutions? But also, how do we balance, secondly, the view that realists, when they speak about America asserting its hegemony and advocating for a unipolar world. They often say that they use two things. One is the expansion of NATO, but secondly, it is the issue of the Orange Revolution, which speaks about liberalization. So how do we balance the fact that it would seem that in as much as we are pro-democratic processes, but the democratic dividend always liberalizes the state and forces us to take neoliberal policies which at the heart of it are pursuing an agenda of the West. So how do we balance that so that we can insulate ourselves from what I believe are the coup legacy that has already started transpiring in the West region of Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we'll have the last question and comment.
Thank you, Doc. My name is Dr. Sonia. I'm from the Southern African Museum Office. I'm a former student leader of SASCO, but at a different campus. And the beauty about SASCO is that you're independent in organization. Therefore, you can direct your own policies, even though we be within the Buddha Alliance. And therefore, it's up to you as young people to think about for yourselves and create autonomous thoughts about foreign policy issues, including on issues around Zimbabwe, issues around peer education, such as the way issues of the direction of young people, such as the way our concerns with the direction of young people in Zimbabwe, especially the student movement. I would like to touch on the proposal and particular petition that is currently underway, especially concerning the situation of the transitional government. I would like to ask a very fair question. What is the incentive of ZANU-PF to engage in such a process? Or even other regional actors, if they simply keep the ball down the lane and then simply replicate the same system over and over again. As Dr. Mandaza highlighted, everyone benefits from the current chaos and instability of Zimbabwe. What are the material incentives for this to be accomplished?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think in answering your question, I'll also answer the other questions, which is briefly to say the following. We have come to the conclusion long ago, in 2016 already, that the state, the party-state conflation in Zimbabwe is given to lack of capacity to reform. It's unable to reform neither politically nor economically. That's the problematic, to put it very simply. And therefore it has to be helped. It has to be liberated from itself. Otherwise, the alternative is to wait for it to simply wither away, which we have also observed that since the coup in 2017, things have gotten worse, not better at all. And reference a paper I wrote some time ago, The Rise and Fall of the Secretariat State. What we are seeing now is actually the decline of the state. It's left to its own. It's going to be very painful for the people, but it's going to end in anarchy. And with some, and including those who have been here before, for brief asylum, coming back here, South Africa, for asylum. That I see as a clear possibility. That the people there, Mnangagos, will run away from a situation in which they've been highly complicit. Because clearly, if things are left to what they are, the people in Zimbabwe will suffer more and more. The economy will bigger and bigger crisis. So, the petition, therefore, was both a statement about the nature of the condition that we are in Zimbabwe and what's required to be done urgently. There is no other option, in our view. Now, I don't believe that if the region, and including South Africa, were to insist that there should be a negotiated settlement, another transitional government, they call it GNU, Transitional Authority, I have no doubt that Mnangagwa will agree, because he knows that there is need for a solution in the country. He is aware of that. There is need for a solution in the country. So we are saying that we need to create the conditions, the diplomatic conditions, through which Mnangagwas can find a solution that might save them too tomorrow. Because this is clearly, I must also say that there's been no open objection to our petition. Not a single official statement against the government. Which means that there is a quiet acknowledgement that the country should move on. And the level of expectation in the country around the petition, the level of expectation that SADC must do something is very high in Zimbabwe right now. People expect that the logical should be done, which is to call for a transitional arrangement sooner or later. Now, what's the other reason for that? The other reason is that even if the opposition were allowed to win, to take power, they don't have the capacity to run a government. With due respect, CCC, you don't. You know that. I asked Chamisa very bluntly that if you want, how many can be members of cabinet in your group? You could even count 10. Okay? So the transitional arrangement helps both an eroded ZANU-PF, which is a mess already, and an incapacitated CCC. And our proposal is saying, look, put the best that you have in ZANU-PF, put the best in CCC, but a third component, equal, must be Zimbabwean from civil society. Technocrats who know what they're talking about. Yeah? They're excluding us, Mandaza, who's part of the sponsorship of this thing. But we have enough people. We have names even. Some might be in this room. We have names of people who can go there and make a difference in the government. But without that, I don't see any progress at all. So, my appeal stands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mandaza. Can we give him a round of applause?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot has been said from the audience, and I think also particularly forward has been made for all of us. And I think for those who are online, they have not taken all the comments. Some of the comments have been made virtually and have also been echoed by some of the speakers.
Very tough situation.
So it is not
almost impossible.
With that being said, I would like to welcome the Khayelihke to actually give us a vote of thanks, given that we are 4 minutes past the time to end our meeting. Well, thank you,
Good evening. Well, they say time is short, so I'll start by saying all protocol observed. In that way, I believe it would mean that all of the persons who need to be recognized have been recognized duly. To our facilitator, thank you very much, Ala Muhammad, for taking us through this journey until this time. Even though we started a bit late, but still trying to make sure that we finish on time. So, Memo Kwela, thanks very much. And of course, also, I'm just going to recognize our speakers as they went through the evening, if you would allow me, and try to be disciplined at the same time. Because, Prof, there's a number of things that you raised that I thought were quite insightful, and also some of them provoked quite a bit of discussion. But I suppose the important point here being that the very nature of the school, it's a platform where we promote political education through dialogue and debate. Your contribution to that regard is very highly appreciated. It really goes into a whole pool of other engagements that will of course follow along this sort of particular line. And the other side of it is what Dr. Masondo was saying, that we are hoping to realize agents of change who don't only understand but also have the ability to go about and change the world into a better place for all. In that regard, I want to recognize Professor Ibbo Mandaza for addressing us here, Dr. Masondo for giving us context and definition, I would say, in terms of why we are here. Let me also single out the members of the Fourth Estate, by the way. For some strange reason, they just all went and sat along next to each other when they walked in here. The SABC Business Day. I'm not sure, Karin, what do you do these days?
I like to keep it secret.
I see. But they've been very useful, I think, in many ways, also in taking this conversation outside these walls. I mean, I'll tell you that from SABC Post, from our own pages, looked into YouTube as well, we probably are standing at close to about 2,000 people that have been engaged in this evening's conversation somewhat. So the chairs might not feel full through physical presence, but really through virtual presence, we certainly felt all. So thank you very much in that respect. I also want to pick on a few individuals here who are the type who make these things happen, and we don't necessarily see them in the forefront. I suppose one obvious person being Kefenze. I'll tell you that Kefenze has come to our Tambo School as an intern, and at this particular moment has really been doing very marvelous work. And I would say in many ways attesting to the fact that this is a school of a space of growth. That's really our motto or way of doing business. And it's very, really satisfying in many ways to be able to sit at an occasion like this and know that someone like him has played quite a big role in making sure it happens as well as it did. But I also saw Masego outside. Where is she now? Oh, outside, yeah. And now all our former interns, principal, they seem to find it very difficult to leave, it seems. But we're very happy to see that you are all still here. This is again the role that you've played. I think the leadership of PYA on this campus. I see that they said there was BEC of the Youth League and SASCO chair, the chairperson, Peterson. I was outside, I was saying to them, you lost the elections of HRC. So we've agreed that we should have our own little chat on the side about what that means and what they should be doing with that moving forward. Our service providers, the live streaming services, sir, thank you very much. Certainly recognize your ability to take the conversation from this room outside these walls as well. And also a photographer who's here, Sfundo Kulu, who I'm sure all of you have seen walking up and down. I'm not seeing him here now. Oh, it's over here, yeah. Thank you very much. Well, Madam Facilitator, I'm going to hand back to you again, because I believe that this is just a check. Am I the one who says, this is it, let's go.
We can actually, considering the limitations of time, have some questions here.
Oh, okay, no. I'm told that there's gifts as well. I'm not sure for who, because I'm also speaking here. I'm not sure how you're going to get this. But thank you all really very much. To yourself as an audience, the engagement tonight. Thank you for your participation. The kind of like views that has been shared here as well. Thank you very, very much. So, Professor, it's taking so long. I wonder if you're going to drive in here with a car, just a small box or something.
While we're bringing the gifts. Prof. Mandaza also gifted the OR school.
Oh, did you call the principal up for that?
Yeah, so that you also receive. So it's wonderful to have gifts like Prof. Mandaza, who actually always comes very gifts.
No, I was saying to Prof that it is SASCO accept defeat. Electoral defeat and exam. Thanks, Prof.
But we're not done yet.
Oh.
You'll receive an gift.
Oh. So, Dr. Ibbo, this is a book produced by one of our board members. It's about the history of South Africa. He's John Pampalis and his co-author. He used to be one of the, I know him very well, teacher and Solomon Mahlangu. So one of the buildings here at Wits University is named after Solomon Mahlangu. So we know that you know a lot about the history, but I think that you should have it just in case it's before you listen to it. Thank you. Dr. Khayelihke Khumalo, by the way, as I was saying, that the way we develop modules, we get experts on subject matters. So she played a major role in providing content and guidance to the gender module. So I'm not only thanking you today for your facilitation of this session, but I also thank you for the contribution that you've made to the development of the gender module, which many of the people find it very, very useful. I know we didn't pay you for the development of that module, but thank you very much. So this is our payment in kind. It's also the t-shirt that during winter you will wear this jacket. And I hope you will probably wear what is given you. It's a jacket, it's a winter jacket. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Alright, thank you very much. So whatever contributions that you have, right? I think some of you perhaps are asking yourself, so what do we do? Because perhaps you're not officials who work at SADC or in President Ramaphosa's office to actually nudge him to say, hey, comrade, go do something different. But then what can we do as ordinary citizens? What can we do as ordinary Africans in response to what we're seeing? I think put this thing vote. And particularly remembering, I don't know if some of you who were listening to Prof. Mandaza, if you noticed, the ache, in the delivery, particularly the analysis of what is happening in Zimbabwe. And I think if you're able to feel that ache, particularly for a man who loves his country, for us who love Zimbabwe as well as Africans, it is important for us to not be silent, to actually say something and action whatever decisions that will come from that. With that being said, thank you for spending these 2 hours with us. May all that you have heard, all the interventions that have been made from the floor, may they inspire you to actually do something in order to improve the situation in our region. Thank you very much. Good night. See you again.
Okay, Mbambela
Yes.
Even this one is just